You've got a sword over his head, and he knows it. And he knows that he said, okay, I can pay the rest of it on the 6th, and you've already got a 3-day notice going that ends on the 5th, and the 6th is the next day, and if he doesn't pay the rent, you are downtown filing it that same day, and he knows it. Yes? Yes. I'm going to get into the details of the 3-day notice in just a second. Actually, the entire eviction process. But right now, I want to establish the fact that it is good business practice, not bad business practice, to deliver the 3-day notice on the 2nd day of the month. Every day that goes beyond that hurts you. Yep, happens all the time. It aggravates me. It aggravates me. But you know what's the most expensive thing that happens to a landlord? When somebody moves out. And I can allow my pride to get in there, which is what would happen to me in a case like that, where they're just not, they're dissing me a little bit. But you know what I remember? I remember I'm getting the rent and I'm getting the late fee. So I'm going to swallow my pride and eat it. Now, if they're going to the 10th, 15th, 20th of the month every month, then I'm probably not going to stand for that. I have, sure. Excuse me. There's a very, boy, forgive me. There's a very specific notice that is provided by the statute that is called the 3-day notice. You can download it from our website. Excuse me. But it says, you're hereby notified that you're indebted to me for the following sum. You have 3 days to pay or quit. To wit, March 6th, 2013. Then there's a little bit of language below that. And it's really very simple. You owe me rent, and you've got 3 days to pay. Very simple. But it has to be the 3-day notice provided by statute. Okay? If you try to make up one on your own, you run the risk of a judge throwing it out, or worse, if the tenant gets an attorney, that's the first thing they're going to look at is the 3-day notice to see if it's defective. If it is, he's going to file a motion to dismiss the case. Oh, and he's also going to file a motion that the plaintiff, that's you, pay the tenant's legal expenses. That's no fun. Okay, so we're going to deliver the 3-day notice on the 2nd day of the month. Okay, now I want to go through the procedure for eviction. What are the steps that it takes to evict a person in the state of Florida? And I hear horror stories all the time that I've got a tenant who knows how to play the game, or knows the ropes, or knows somebody down at the courthouse. Bull. Okay? The evictions in Florida take 30 days. Sometimes a little faster, sometimes a little slower, but measured in days. Okay? Christmas is a bad time to do it because of the holidays, but I'm serious. Even at Christmas time, we were getting evictions done in 5 weeks. The beginning of the process is the 3-day notice. Okay, again, you can download that from our website. Please use the correct 3-day notice. You should hand deliver the 3-day notice, if at all possible. You can either hand it to somebody at the property, or you can post it in a conspicuous place at the property. If you mail it, which is an option, you have to add 5 calendar days to that. Okay, so avoid that if you can, for the obvious reason that it's just extending the time. There's an affidavit of service at the bottom of the 3-day notice in which you indicate whether it was hand-delivered to Mrs. So-and-so, and you write in a name, or it was posted at the property, or it was mailed and 5 days were added, and then you sign it, or whoever delivers it signs it as the affidavit of service. Okay? So at the end... Sure. Yeah, I usually put it in an envelope and just kind of stick it in the door threshold next to the doorknob. But anyway, it's fine. You don't have to take a picture of it. You don't have to, your affidavit of service is all the proof that the judge is going to require that you actually delivered that notice as indicated. Anything else, if you did anything differently, of course, that would be perjury. You don't want to do that. At the end of the 3 days, if they have not paid, let's calculate the 3 days. Very important. Let's pretend that today is Monday, the 2nd day of the month, and we're going to deliver our 3-day notice today. So the law says you can you count out 3 days, not including the date of service, which is the date you deliver it, 3 business days, not including weekends or holidays. So if this is Monday the 2nd, the date of service is the 2nd, we count out Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday is the 3rd day. Okay, so on the 3-day notice, you'll say you have until Thursday what would it be, the 5th, I guess? Okay, 3-day would be Monday doesn't count, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is the last day. You can file it in court on Friday. Okay, there's a space in there to put in the amount of money they owe. It is rent and rent only. No late fees, no unpaid deposits, no unreimbursed expenses. Rent and rent only. It doesn't mean you're relinquishing your claim to the money. You're not. But in Florida, account 1 eviction it's a very precise lawsuit, and the law says you can evict for non-payment of rent, but that's all. So just put in the amount of rent, that's enough. And then finally, the 3rd day, which is what we've already stated.
So you've got 5 months left. All the rent for all 5 months.
No, you're asking, can you accelerate the rent? Right. You cannot accelerate the rent in a residential lease in Florida, only commercial. Okay, so it would just be the rent that is due as of the date of the 30-day notice. So if they haven't paid rent for 3 months, and rent's $1,000 a month, then the amount demanded in the 3-day would be $3,000, and they've got until this date to pay or quit. And so on the 4th day, if they haven't paid, haven't called you, and nothing's happened, your next step is to file what's called a count 1 complaint and summons in county court. Pretty simple stuff. And these documents are delivered either by the sheriff or by a civil process server to the tenant. And the tenant will receive them, and it's really pretty simple. It says you are being sued for eviction. If you want a hearing, you have to do 2 things. You have to first write a letter to the judge and explain why you don't think you should be evicted. And number 2, you have to give the judge all of the money that's demanded in the complaint. If you don't do both things within 5 business days, you may be evicted without further notice. And that's exactly how it goes. Yes? Everything is up to the subject to what the law is. What the judge says. I get that. I'm just telling you what the complaint and summons says. Okay. If a judge wants to give her an extra 5 days, he can do it. And I've seen it happen, and I don't really have a problem with it. But the complaint says the tenant receives the document. It says you have 5 business days to do these 2 things. If you don't, you may be evicted without further notice, which means no hearing. Your job then on the 6th business day, assuming no money and no answer, is you return to court to file a couple of additional documents. These are called default motions. And they basically say, Your Honor, they didn't do what they were supposed to. Will you please give me a default final judgment? Default final judgment means I win without a hearing. Okay, and that's how probably 99.5% of all evictions in the state of Florida go. No hearing, default judgment, default final judgment, typically about 30 days after you file it. Okay, if there's a hearing, then you attend the hearing. There's 2 kinds of hearing. Generally, there's 2 kinds of hearings. The first is what's generally called a 5-minute hearing, and that's where the tenant writes to the judge, he says I owe $5,000, I only owe $4,000, and I can prove it. And the judge is going to say, okay, let's spend 5 minutes and talk about it. So there's going to be a hearing, and by the way, most of the time the judge will allow you to attend that hearing by phone. And both parties give their story to the judge, and the judge is making a ruling. The amount of money that the tenant owes is $4,500, and you have 3 days or some such date, a very short period of time, to deposit that money into the registry of the court, or I will issue a final judgment. Okay? If the tenant pays all the money into the registry, then the judge will convene what's called a full hearing, or typically a 30-minute hearing. You almost always will have to attend that, or your attorney. And again, both sides are going to tell their side of the story. You're going to explain that the tenant didn't pay, you want your house back. Tenant's going to say, well, I didn't pay, but I should have, and I paid, and now I want to stay in the house. And the judge is going to ask you, what do you want? And you're going to say, let him stay, give me the money, or no, I want him out, or whatever. The judge is going to make a ruling. But I'm telling you, the number of hearings that take place compared to the number of filings is infinitesimal. Infinitesimal. Okay? So the final judgment is signed. That means you win. Final judgment means you win. That doesn't mean you can go to the house and throw all the stuff on the yard. You need to take the next step, which is to file what's called a writ of possession with the clerk of court. Writ of possession. You type up the writ, you take it to the new courthouse. Has anybody been to the new courthouse? That's what you get for $400 million. Anyway, a Taj Mahal for lawyers and criminals. Writ of possession is delivered to the clerk of court. You go to one window to file it, then another window to get it back. Typically about 30 minutes there. Then you got to go back to the sheriff's department over on Liberty Street and file the writ with the sheriff's civil unit there, pay their fee, $90. And then in about a week, the sheriff's deputy will come out to the house, post a 24-hour notice on the door, we're coming tomorrow. He'll call you and say, meet me at a such and such time. You meet him at the property. The deputy will go into the house. If there's anyone in the house, he'll tell him, get out, don't come back. He's not asking for names. His job is to return possession of the house to the owner. I'm very sorry. Everybody leaves, and then it'll be your responsibility to go into the house, take all of the personal property out, put it on the curb for the trash, change the locks, and you're done. And that's how we do evictions in Florida. Yes?
On that 3-day notice, is there any stipulations on time? Because, you know, somebody's going to say, well, I have until 11:59 p.m. to pay that.
The third day would be, well, effectively, it's probably 8 o'clock in the morning the next day. I mean, you could file the eviction the minute that the courthouse is open the next day or at the end of the 3 days. It doesn't actually have a time component on it, but I think it's understood. Who else has a question? Yeah.
What's the deposit cost for the process?
We charge $360. That includes all the court fees, civil process fees, courier fees, and all the rest. If you do it yourself, it's about $100 less. And that's 4 trips to the courthouse, and it's not worth it, really. Just, you go to our website, fill out an online form, we'll send everything to you by email. You sign it, call us, we'll send a courier out to pick it up, and you're done. That's all you've got to do. Yeah.
Well, that time frame, I mean, just add an extra day. Just wait 4 days. I'm not going to kill you, then you don't worry about the time of the day.
Okay. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
And say, moving out, walking the fire, or all the possessions have to go through.
Yeah. I guess the question is, assuming the sheriff has shown up and executed the writ of possession, returned possession to you, he's going to leave as soon as possible, as long as he sees that we've got a peaceful situation. Then it's your job to go in and get everything out of the house and put it on the curb for the trash. Your question is, can you go through it and keep any of it for yourself, I would assume. The law doesn't really specify. All it says is that you are to return take the personal property out of the house and put it on the curb for the trash. What is going to happen, the neighbors are going to descend on it. I don't know where the garage sale guys find out about these evictions, but they're right behind the sheriff. And they're picking the stuff clean. It's like a dinosaur that dies, and all the vultures are there right now. So if you're one of the vultures, I don't know that there's any cameras out there to tell you, record it or not. Did I answer the question?
Yeah.
No, yeah. I can't give you a definitive answer. I know this. I know that's right, but there's a second part of this business that goes beyond the law, and I think it's more important, and that's the practical considerations of being a landlord. I might be within the law, but I also might be making my tenant really mad at me, and I don't want to grab a scratch and dent a rusty, $100 washing machine and have him see me do it, and he's going to get even now, or he's going to get it back. It isn't worth it as far as I'm concerned. It just isn't.
Too often, made all everything had to go everything.
Right.
Even have a magazine come in with mine. These who's magazine online.
That's right, and all of that's true. Now,
They don't want them to have any reason to come back in the property.
well, there's that, but also when the writ of possession is executed by the sheriff, you are relieved of any liability for the personal property of the tenant. Now, if for example, you do the eviction and then you get a final judgment and you win, and then you go to the house and you say, well, they moved out, isn't this great? And you don't get a writ of possession, you run the risk of the tenant coming back and saying, I didn't move out and you stole all my stuff. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, we had an eviction right here in Jacksonville. The owner lives in Atlanta. We did the eviction. He got a final judgment. He went to the house over in Riverside. The neighbor said, oh yeah, he moved out over the weekend. He had a big U-Haul trailer. Everybody saw him do it. Blah, blah, blah. I said, great. He did not get a writ of possession. He just took possession of the house because, hey, it's vacant, right? 3 months later, he got a nasty gram from an attorney. I have a copy of it. Just all kinds of horrible things. But basically he said, my tenant, my client did not move. You stole all of the stuff, and you ready for this? He demanded 1 year of rent as compensation. Okay? Now you know that the tenant, you don't know, but you certainly assume that the tenant didn't put him on retainer. The lawyer is going to take 30% of whatever we get, right? Well, what happens when the lawsuit is going to go beyond $5,000? That's not small claims court anymore, is it? That's superior court. That means when you go to your lawyer, he's going to say, okay, I want a $10,000 retainer to get started. Hello? $10,000 retainer to get started on this case. You've got money. This kid who was living in a one-bedroom, $500 a month, he didn't have any money. He's got nothing to lose. That landlord, after doing all the calculations, he wrote a check to that tenant for $15,000, all for failing to get the writ of possession. Had he gotten the writ of possession, he would have delayed the turnaround getting back into the apartment by 7 days. Okay? He's a good friend, not a good friend of mine, he's a very good client of ours, and he wants me to tell this story everywhere I go. Okay? The 7 days and the extra $100 that it takes to get the writ of possession, it is worth it. Yeah.
We've learned that same lesson. We never had to pay anything like that. We will not do an eviction unless it's all the way. Don't start it.
Yeah. That's just good advice. Yeah.
Used to, offer come out and say 1 hour. Now,
I haven't seen that in 20 years.
show up. I'm right off the
What they do now is they're busy. There's 10 deputies. They're doing the civil stuff. It's not just evictions, but a lot of other things for the civil department.
come out and serve the community. No one's there. Leave.
They give you a little slip of paper. That's very important to keep that because it means, and his instruction is, if they come back, if there's any trouble, call 911, and then you give that little slip of paper to the deputy that shows up. It says, this is not a civil matter, this is an eviction, and they will arrest the guy and take him downtown. Now,
You need to be there when the sheriff shows up.
oh yeah, you have to be. The sheriff's not going to do this for you. Yeah.
Time frame now as far as moving stuff to the street.
Well, that's another practical consideration. The law doesn't give you a time frame, but to me, it's a practical thing. If I get it out of the house in 30 minutes and it's all on the curb, my relationship with this guy is over with. Okay? Gee, what if I leave it in there for 3 days? Okay? He knows it's in there. He's going to break windows. He's going to try to get at it. He's whatever. What if I keep it a month? At some point, I've assumed liability again, haven't I? I mean, I don't know what the time frame is, but some lawyer, some judge is going to say, no, you're holding on to that property for that tenant, and you've got to. I'm saying nothing good happens by delaying this at all. Get it out of there and get your house back. Yeah.
What about if it's in a community that's able to put out?
It goes to the garbage, wherever that is. In a multifamily community, that would be the dumpster area, that kind of stuff.
What about if, you have to store the property?
No, sir. No, it goes to the trash. It's trash. I don't have to try to locate them. All I have to do is show up with the sheriff. The sheriff goes into the house. If there's anybody in there, he says, get out. You then take everything immediately, everything out onto the curb, done, change the locks, and you're done. You don't have to go find anybody. Yeah, I'll talk to that. I'll speak to that in a second.
You are going to talk about that.
I am going there right now, yeah.
You got a lot of information down. You got to keep it going.
Well, we're going to run out of time. I know we are. Any other questions about evictions? I mean, it's very simple. Anybody who tells you that you can beat the system, I'm sorry. I mean, I've been doing this too long. We'll do thousands of evictions this year, and they're all going to end up the same way. 30 days, final judgment, default, no hearing, nothing. I mean, they almost all of them end up that way. Okay, and last thing on evictions. Anything? Very good. Who remembers number 4? Number 4. Right, it's a retail business. Don't forget customer service. And in a lot of ways, customer service really just speaks to the whole process of interacting with your customer. I mean, I don't want to talk to you about treating people nice. You should already know that. And showing up on time, that should all be a given. But it's really more, what is the total management activities that you bring to manage your tenants? Okay? The nice part of that is, by managing the tenants, I'm talking about doing the good things. Fixing stuff when it breaks, coming around and inspecting once in a while, make sure that everything's okay, make sure they're happy, is there anything they need. Those nice little things that add sometimes years to the total duration of this tenancy. That's good for you. You also have tenants that misbehave. Now, I know that's going to be a shock and a disappointment to you guys that are thinking about getting into the business. I said earlier, this is a simple business, meaning there's a very small number of rules that you need to remember in order to be successful. Unlike real estate investing's got 10,000 rules, maybe 100 million rules. I don't know. I mean, how many different ways are there to invest in real estate? It's a complicated subject, but landlording is not. Landlording is really very simple. It's hard because we're dealing with people. Okay, and not everybody does what they're supposed to do. So you have to remember that you are the manager, you own that property, you have the law on your side, and when somebody does something that isn't the way you want it to be, you have power and authority to deal with it. Okay, I'm going to talk about the good stuff first. Good landlords. I've already said this. I'm looking for a tenant who's going to live there, who's going to pay the rent on time, take reasonably good care of the property, and live there forever. That last part is really important. My personal goal with a tenant that's a decent tenant, I want them to live there forever. My former partner, God rest his soul, he's dead now, but he first rented to a woman a particular house in 1971. She is still renting that house. Okay, she's paying the rent a little bit late now. What are you going to do? Gosh. Anyway, stuff. She's about 86 years old. You don't want them to move out. You just make money like crazy when you get to keep a tenant for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. It's just awesome. I mean, they tear the place up, but you don't have to do anything about it. It's awesome. It really is. So I want to keep them forever, and a lot of that has to do with me and providing good customer service. But there's also customer problems. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of different problems that can come up. But almost always, well, here's rule number 1. Ready? Listen to me carefully. Never write a letter to your tenant. That usually brings the house down. Never, never, never write a letter to your tenant. And here's what I mean. I've seen 6-page tomes from landlords to their tenants trying to explain the problem, and paragraph 6 completely contradicts paragraph 3 on page 3, and it's a mishmash, and everybody's confused, and you end up with all kinds of problems. The Florida statutes, Chapter 83, and I'll refer to 83 a good bit here from now on. Chapter 83 is the Florida landlord-tenant statutes, and it addresses almost everything that a landlord or a tenant would run into. These statutes provide almost every letter that we need if something comes up. So, for example, I talked about the 3-day notice earlier. That's in the statute. You can go to Chapter 83, 48, I think it is, and it says this is the text of a 3-day notice. There's also something called a 7-day warning notice. There's actually 2. There's a 7-day warning notice with a right to cure, and a 7-day warning, no right to cure. This is the most powerful letter that you've got, second only to the 3-day, when you have a tenant who's causing problems. Parking on the grass, unauthorized guests, unauthorized animals. Do you get over there and start screaming at them in the front yard? No. It's very simple. You get a 7-day warning notice. It's actually called a non-compliance, and it says, it's actually a long letter, but you only have to fill in just the first section. You are in non-compliance for the following reason: unauthorized pets. And then it goes on to say you have 7 days to cure this problem. If you do not cure this problem within 7 days, your lease is immediately terminated and you have to leave. And not every judge in town, I'm not going to say that, but a judge will enforce this every time if you do your part. So it's a 7-day notice with a right to cure. It goes on to say that if you cure the problem within 7 days, but it reoccurs within 12 months, we don't have to go through this a second time. Your lease is immediately terminated and you've got to move. That's a powerful letter. Now, if you have someone who has multiple non-compliances, parking on the grass, unauthorized persons, unauthorized pets, do 3 separate non-compliance. Don't try to cram them all into one. They might cure 2 of the 3 problems, but not the 3rd one. So if you have 3 separate ones, you're okay. All right. So where you have a problem with your tenant, just use a 7-day warning notice. That's all you have to do. Make sure you keep a copy for yourself. Obviously, make sure you keep a nice file of every piece of paper that goes to your tenants, including the receipts and any other correspondence, in a separate file. Okay? There's nothing like showing up in court if it comes to that, and you're the one who's well organized, got a nice stack of letters in a nice binder, and you can show it to the judge while the tenant's over there screaming at you because you're a racist and you're a bad landlord and all that other stuff, which is what happens. Okay? You can be organized. I want to touch on the language in the 7-day warning notice with no right to cure. There are non-compliances that are of such a nature that the tenant does not get the right to cure the problem. And the specific language is this: destruction, damage, or misuse of the landlord's or other tenant's property by intentional act or subsequent or continued unreasonable disturbance. That's very broad and very powerful. And so that means if you've got somebody really tearing your place to pieces, you do not have to fret about it, but you don't have to, go to extraordinary measures. The 7-day warning notice, no right to cure. Your lease is terminated. You've got to get out in 7 days, and if they don't move, you evict them, and you're going to win almost every time if you're being reasonable on your side. You've got a lot of power as a landlord. Don't forget it. Well, I'm not sure that abusing the wife by itself is an issue that, well, boy, I'm going to get in trouble saying that. What I mean by that is that's disturbing the peace, isn't it? Yeah, and they can't disturb the peace. If they're disturbing your peace or the peace of the neighbors around you, that's a non-compliance. They've got 7 days to cure the problem. Unfortunately, the New Hampshire Supreme Court kind of muddied the water for us a little bit. In 2004, a woman was getting beat up by her boyfriend. The landlord went to the tenant and said, "You got to stop this." And then he tried to he put a little religion on her and some other things, and she didn't like it. So he evicted her because this guy kept beating her up, and the cops kept coming out. So the eviction, the American Civil Liberties Union got into it. Now you've got a problem when the American Civil Liberties Union has filed a brief in your eviction case, okay? But this one went all the way to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. And the New Hampshire Supreme Court said, God, this is the truth, so help me God. Because the majority of the victims of domestic violence are women, it is therefore a fair housing violation to evict a woman for domestic violence. It is not the reverse for men. That's the truth. So that case was thrown out. Oh, you don't raise your hand?
I'll tell you another time. The girl that's there, and he called up, hey, I want him gone.
I can evict him. I can evict. You have to evict anybody who won't voluntarily leave. Okay. What's the first step you would take in a case like that, though? What's the very first thing you do as soon as you find out he's living there? 7-day warning notice, right? If he has not addressed the problem in 7 days, you evict him. Now, in that case, I really don't care if she wants to let him move in. My rule is going to be fill out a rental application, and I'm going to pull your rap sheet. I'm going to pull your criminal history. If you don't have a criminal history of any significance, I'm going to let you stay. I don't care. If that makes them happy and that tenancy is going to last longer, I'm okay with that, but I want everybody to know that I'm in charge, not them.
If we have a tenant that wants someone to move in, we redo the lease to include that tenant. If they just move in, we don't have a landlord-tenant relationship with them, you might not be able to evict, you might have to reject, which is twice as expensive.
Well, I don't think you'd have to get into the rejection thing, but the fact is, what you're saying is you've got a policy of maintaining control of what's going on. And that's really what I'm preaching here. There's probably 10 different ways of doing it, but you are in charge. Somebody else had a hand up?
I do have a question. You can answer. The 7-day warning and the right to cure, I mean, is that all contractually based? What you're willing to accept and not?
The non-compliance would be either a technical violation of the lease or an actual vector violation of the lease and or a violation of the landlord-tenant law.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to get clarity, because if you have a tenant, and they have guests that, say, are with temporary guests, but you need to leave, it would be the responsibility to evict them.
Anybody who you don't want to be there, who does not have the legal right to be there, who refuses to leave, you can't go in there and throw them out. Only the sheriff can do that. He can only do it with a court order, and the court order comes after an eviction.
Would it be the tenant responsible, since they invited that person? They would have the tenant responsible?
These scenarios can get kind of complicated depending, but basically I think what you're saying is your tenant who has a lease with you is living there fine. She allows her boyfriend to move in. She moves out, and he's still in there, and now he's creating trouble.
No, I'm talking about, but you have, this just happened to be a true story. They let a nephew and his wife stay to get a job, was expected to stay a couple of weeks. They never moved out, and the man who lived there was getting them evicted. Of course, he owned it. His guests. So if they have a guest, they can't get rid of the guests, and it's the landlord's responsibility to get rid of it.
The person who has the responsibility is the person who signed the lease. So you would evict the person who signed the lease. The one else has got to leave, even without their names being called when the sheriff shows up. Who else? We're gonna move on here. But is there anything else? Point is, you're in charge. This is your house. You have a lot of power and authority to take care of problems when they come up. I would like to emphasize that if you're going to do a really, really good job of tenant screening, you're likely to have far fewer problems than other landlords. And so you're going to want to spend a lot more of your time asking yourself, what are the creative things that I can do to enhance this relationship and get this tenant to want to stay? Because I promise you this, good tenants are just as afraid of getting a bad landlord as you are afraid of getting a bad tenant. Okay, and you've got to satisfy that on both angles. Okay, who can remember? Oh, I've got to do this. Sorry, security deposits, very important. When you moves out, well, you have to understand that the security deposit is the tenant's money, not yours, and that it is under the law. It is being held in trust by you for the tenant. And so when the tenant moves out, if you intend to give a full refund of the deposit, you have to give them that money within 15 days. If there's no claim imposed against the deposit, 15 days. If you intend to impose a claim against the security deposit, then you have 30 days to do so. And there's a very, very specific letter that has to be mailed to the tenant, to the last known address. Very commonly, that's your property. It must be mailed within 30 days, certified mail. Now listen, if you don't send the notice, the tenant is entitled to a full refund of the deposit, regardless of any money they owe you. And so if there's a bunch of people out there that you have not sent this letter to, they could all come at you at once, and you have to give every one of them their deposit back. So make sure you get this letter out every time within 30 days. It's a very, very specific letter. It's available on our website, for free. Just get it done within 30 days. And then you're in the strongest possible position you can be in. But just be sure that you get the security deposit done in 30 days.
That would be in addition to
Well, no, it's any tenancy. There are no exceptions. If you have a good tenant who moves out, or if you have to evict them, you still have to treat the security deposit in the same way. There's no difference in that as far as that is concerned. And then finally, what do you do when a tenant moves out, a good tenant or something other than an eviction? They move out and you go in and they've left some property behind. The first thing you have to do is estimate the value of the property. Is it worth more or less than $500? These are auction prices. If it's worth less than $500 in your honest judgment, then there's a particular letter, again, available at the website, that you mail to them at their last known address, and it notifies them that they have that there's abandoned personal property and that they have 15 days to come back and claim it. Otherwise, you can dispose of it any way you want. So it's just good form that when you go into a property and there's just a small amount of debris even, send a letter. Send the letter. It's just good form. It's protecting you against someone coming back later and saying, I had a whole bunch of stuff in there. Well, no, you didn't. He had this junk, and it was worth $100 in my judgment, and I notified you. Okay? If it is worth more than $500, hang on, baby. We're going for a long ride here. An example of this would be someone who just disappears. I've had this happen. Woman moved in, stayed there 4 or 5 months, and the next thing we knew, she was gonzo, and everything she owned was still in the house. Okay, under the law, when that happens, where it is clearly worth more than $500, there's a whole bunch you have to do. You first have to put it all in storage. Okay, you have to pay the storage fees, of course, and you have to do the work, and you have to take really, really good care of the property because it's not yours, and you're holding it in trust for the tenant. And then there's a number of other steps that are done. There's some advertising that happens and so forth, but ultimately, this property is then auctioned off on the courthouse steps. How you bring all that down to the courthouse, a sofa bed, I mean, it's a big screen, I don't know, but it's got to be auctioned off at the courthouse steps. The money, you get reimbursed for your expenses for storage and for advertising and so forth. The rest of the money goes to the county. The county holds it for a year for the tenant. If the tenant comes back and claims that he'll get the money from the county, at the end of a year, the money reverts to the county and we're done. So in a case where the property is worth more than $500, you got a big deal on your hands, and I believe you're better off evicting that person because you've got property in there. You don't know, you assume they're still living there, they haven't paid the rent, drop a 3-day notice on it, do the eviction, 30 days later, everything goes out to the curb for the trash, and you're done. It's a whole lot simpler process. That makes sense? Put it on the door. Put it on the door, yeah. If you haven't been notified they've moved, and there's all this stuff in there, they haven't paid the rent, that's all I know. Yeah.
What if they have a house full of furniture? Are you responsible for doing it yourself?
Yeah, that's what I was just talking about. They move out, leave all that stuff behind. If it's worth more than $500, you have to store it.
You can't get a mover to do it and charge.
You can, sure, but that's money out of your pocket. Yeah,
You can't charge them for it.
I think you can, but that would be from the auction money. I just think you're better off evicting them. I really do. There are times when you just can't avoid it. They call from Pennsylvania and say, I just moved, and or worse yet, you get a certified letter from Pennsylvania. I just moved. I'm running from my husband. All my stuff is in there. Sorry, see you bye. You got to store the property now. Yeah.
Check the jail.
That's really true. It is. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Okay, you sent me a letter.
I would say don't check the jail, because then you have to.
You don't know who his mother is, though. You can't take that risk. No, I'm putting a 3-day notice on the door, and another case similar to that is what do you do when somebody dies and all their stuff is left behind? There is a paragraph that can be put into the lease that when the last occupying tenant dies, the landlord is not responsible for personal property. Put that in your lease. It's right in the statute. Okay? And I've had this happen. The problem is the family comes in and we want to take mom's possessions. I don't know who you are. And I know we got probate happening somewhere, or a will or a trust. There's something going on. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know. I'm not getting involved. You got a real problem with I'm sorry? We do. And actually, when I leave, I'm going to tell you to go to the website. I've put something up there for you tonight called, there's a forms package, about 30 different things that support what we're doing tonight. All of it would include the forms. If you just go to our website, you have to create an account, and which is easy. Then go to the member section. You'll see the forms and documents. Go there and go into the miscellaneous business forms section. There's a document there called the mistakes, I think it is. I forgot what I called it now. But anyway, it's very obvious. The rules, I think it is. The rules. And it's basically a package of forms and documents and articles supporting what we've done tonight. All the forms, all the documents. But the clause that I'm talking about really is in the statute, and it's very clear. It says, in the event of the death of the last tenant, the landlord is not responsible for disposition of the tenant's personal property. You don't throw it away. Okay. We're done with that. Number 5. How much time do we have?
Adam, can we get a link to the
Pretty nice.
slide on our side?
Yeah, the website is floridalandlord.com. That's FLAlandlord.com. It's free to everybody. Just go register. Number 5, it's a business. We could talk about this for like 5 hours and just get a menu going. But the fact is, this is not monopoly money we're playing with, boys and girls. It's the real thing. And if you do it right, if you approach this business as a business and you're really serious about making money and building wealth, about 10 or 15 years from now, you're going to be shocked. You know what? This happened to me. There's a guy, we all know him. Well, a lot of us know him. And I don't know how long he's been, 20, 25 years he's been renting property. He's got 10 houses. And he and I went to a seminar in Orlando. I was actually doing the seminar, and he asked if I would take him. So we're talking, yakking, we're back and forth. And we're talking about his business, and I said, well, how many properties do you have? And how much debt do you have? I said, no, they're all paid for. These are average $175,000 homes. I said, you realize you're a millionaire? He went, huh? Yeah. He owns his house, he's out there working like a dog, making his couple $100 a month on each property, or really more than that now. But what happened to him overnight, almost overnight, seemed to him was, hey, I arrived. It really does happen. It really does. So if you stick to it, and if you buy property correctly, and you select your tenants well, and you manage them well, a day is coming, not tomorrow. It gets a little easier 5 years from now, but 10, 15 years from now, amazing stuff is going to happen to you financially. Amazing stuff is going to happen. And what you're going to find out is how hard it is to get out of the business. I'm going to spend 20 seconds on this. Who knows what depreciation is? Okay, that means that you depreciate your $100,000 home at over 27 and a half years. Okay, so if you bought your property for a $275,000 home, that means you take $10,000 off your other income every year. Okay, so if you're in a 30% tax bracket, that saves you $3,000 in taxes every single year, right? That's awesome until you get rid of the property. Now, it doesn't matter if you sell it or if it's foreclosed. But the government's going to come back and say, you have to take all of that depreciation that you took, let's say over 20 years. That's $200,000. Okay? You've got $200,000 total depreciation over 10 years. They'll make you take all of it back, and they're going to tax it at, are you ready for this? 25%. Your tax bill for the year you sell those houses is $50,000, not including capital gains. Now, one of the things PRU is going to teach you is how to avoid that through different kinds of exchanges. There's a lot of different ways to avoid it. But the fact is that if you don't know what you're doing and you're not running like a business, you're going to find out that even though you owned, another guy I know owned properties for 10 years, he bought them in the late 90s and early 2000s. He refinanced them all. You know what happened with him in the bubble. And eventually after about 10 years, he just let them all go back to foreclosure. 1 year later, he got a 1099 for like $600,000. Who wants one of those after you've just gone into foreclosure? Okay, so that's what happens. You've got to understand what this business is about, just like any other. If you do, you'll be able to make intelligent, strategic decisions that help you make money, not lose money. If you don't, you're going to be a victim of your own ignorance. This is a business. You have to understand business. Go to school. Go to PRU classes. But you have to understand what's an LLC and in what ways does that give you advantages or not. Or a corporation. Should you own your property in a land trust? It just goes on and on and on. Do you use accounting software to manage your money? If you're not using accounting software to manage your money, don't get into this business. You've got to know where your money's going. And those of you who are using a piece of paper and a pencil or just a checkbook register, you don't know if you're making any money because you only run a P&L once a year, and that's to pay your taxes. You only run a P&L once a year because it takes 6 hours to go through all that with a calculator. At our peak, we had 120 rental properties, me and my two partners. It took me, 5 seconds to run a P&L for an entire year for 120 individual properties. 5 seconds. That was in 1991 with QuickBooks. Okay, it's even faster with QuickBooks, 2012 today. Accounting software is essential. If you're not doing it, find somebody who can teach you the software and do it, because otherwise you don't know if you're making any money or not. You don't. This is a business. There's too many things we can talk about, but every business has basic elements. There's a sales and marketing department where you carefully craft the message that you're going to bring to the marketplace. What are you trying to do? How are you going to do it? What kind of customers are you trying to find? And you have a written business plan that helps you do that. Otherwise, 6 months go by and you're still just talking about being a real estate investor. We could spend much more time on this. The finance, of course, is just critical in real estate investing because there are so many nuances that enter it that are not logical. Tax code is not logical, but it's a real part of your world. And so you need to understand what those things are. And I don't mean just have a CPA that does it for you. I mean, you need to understand, at least at a conversational level, what this stuff is and how it works. Speaking about accounting software, there's a whole bunch of opportunities out there. There's what is called local software, which I think we're beginning to see the end of. That's where the program is actually on your computer, like Microsoft Word is on your computer and whatever other programs you have. But everything is now moving to the cloud. Everything's moving to the cloud, meaning these applications are now on a website somewhere. And so where in the past we had QuickBooks, and Tenant Pro, and Yardi and Rent Right applications to help us manage rental property on your computer, and if you weren't sitting in front of that computer, you couldn't see any of your data. But now we have programs that are in the cloud, so you now have an online version of QuickBooks, which means you can be on a cruise in Alaska and still see your accounting. Ooh, how cool is that? No matter where you are, or you can even have more than one person looking at it at the same time. There's other applications out there that are really pretty interesting that are online versions of professional property management software that is actually used by companies that manage other people's property. There's a couple of them here: Buildium, Rent Manager, iRealty Manager. We've got about, I think, 8 or 9 that we've reviewed at the website. These are web-based programs that help you manage rental property. There's a lot of tools out there to help you become a very successful investor, and I hope I've showed you tonight that it's really very simple. If you avoid the mistakes that other people make, you will build wealth. If you avoid the mistakes, don't pay too much for rental property. Okay? Don't give the keys to just anybody. Both of those are easy. Deliver a 3-day notice on the second. Nothing bad happens to you if you do, but you're in charge. Number 4, it's about the customer. You're in charge. Number 5, it's a business. Those are not big things to ask you to do. If you are not willing to do those, don't come back to PRU. Don't pretend that you're a real estate investor. You can't do it. You're just going to be another victim who talks about it and doesn't do it, ends up losing money. Obey the rules and you'll build wealth. So we've got about 15 minutes probably for Q&A if you want. Anybody have any questions, comments, complaints, suggestions? FloridaLandlord.com, FLA landlord.com. You have to create an account. If you'll scroll down just a little bit, there's a register button in the middle of the page, big red button. Click on that, you create a username and password, and then after that you'll log in using that password, and you have full access to the entire website. I'm sorry.
If they'll get a link on the PRU website, get it, just go there and click on it and take the right to the
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Property management software, Buildium, and the others, are they on your website?
There's a description of them and what they are, a summary, and then there's a link to the actual site. Yes.
Do you have a preferred method you use to get away from that recapture?
Oh gosh, well, it really depends on a bazillion. We could talk for hours about tax policy, but the best method is a 1031 exchange. I mean, that's where you exchange property for another. There's very tight rules on how that's done. But what's that? Well, that's the other one. Yeah, I mean, it just depends. But it's critical that you understand what depreciation recapture is. I mean, a lot of people. Let's use that same scenario. The guy owed the property for 10 years. He had $200,000 in depreciation, ended up owing $50,000 in recapture. That is 25% tax against $200,000 recapture. But what's the other thing he's looking at? Capital gains. Over 10 years, that $200,000 house is worth, well, it should have been worth $300,000. Depending on what year it was. So let's say it was worth $300,000. What's his capital gain? There's another $20,000. Now, if you were going to lose $70,000 in a deal, would you make the deal? If you were going to have a surprise expense of $70,000 Would you do the deal? No. You'd do something else. Well, I mean, when that's $70,000 that just goes down the drain, it does nobody any good. So there's better ways to do it. It's a really important component in making legitimate business decisions. Who else?
Thinking about selling a property on contract, like with the own or something.
As soon as you don't own that property anymore, you have to recover your depreciation and you have to realize your capital gain. It won't matter in a land trust. If it was owned by a corporation or an LLC or something, then that entity would still have the tax liability, but the fact remains that somebody has the tax liability. Joe?
Well, you can defer the capital gain as you receive it if you are financed.
Yep, right, but you can't defer the recapture.
But on a rent to own, you're not going to put in their name for a while, so that's not even the same.
Right, but again, I think rather than getting too specific about individual cases, the fact is there's a lot of rules out there.
Yeah.
And you need to understand that those rules are there and how they apply to you. And I think it's critical that you must understand them, at least at a conversational level, rather than relying 100% on your CPA. Because your CPA, I guarantee you, is a very bad real estate investor. Right? Yeah. Who else? Questions, comments? Yeah.
Require your people to have bank accounts.
No, I would say easily half of the renters out there don't have bank accounts because they don't know how to manage their money. They end up bouncing checks. It's too expensive. They do cash and money orders. That's fine with me. I don't want to. I'm a landlord. I'm a real estate investor. I don't want to become a social worker. You know, you get close enough to that as a landlord as it is. Who else? Okay, Joe. Thank you. I've had a lot of fun. I'll be here for a few minutes afterwards if you have any questions or anything, but please take it to heart and go to the website, download that booklet tonight. It's about 35 pages of stuff. If you want to just pass this around, you can see some of the stuff that's in it, but it'll bring back to memory some of the things we've talked about tonight. Thank you.